Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome and welcome back to my channel. Okay, in today's video, we are going to be talking about open floor plan mistakes because open floor plans have been really popular mid-2010s for sure, super popular. Now, a lot of people prefer a closed floor plan or a broken concept or a traditional concept, a bunch of different names for it. But open floor plan is still very, very popular. And a lot of people love it because I think there's distinct advantages and disadvantages to both. And so I thought in this video, since the open floor plan is so popular and so many of you have them, I thought let's talk about how you either are decorating one or maybe you're renovating or you're doing a new build and you plan on doing an open concept. What are sort of the pitfalls that you might face to avoid here? Let's talk about it. Okay, first mistake that I think people make when doing an open floor plan is that they don't create sort of clearly defined areas. So the tricky part about an open floor plan is that on one hand, you are taking into account the entire room. So let's say it's a great room that might have dining area, might have your kitchen, and might have living all in the same room. Like there's no clear divider, there's no walls to sort of separate them. They're just all three lumped into one place. Now, that's fine, but I think, and it's great, and there's some advantages, like I said, but the challenge when designing it is that you do have to take into account the whole space, so all three rooms combined, while also taking into account that these are still look and feel and should look and feel like three separate distinct rooms. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that when taking into account things like a rug in a living room, you should be using that as a tool to create sort of a clearly defined living area. So that means having a large enough rug so that you can put the sofa, front two sofa legs on, or you can do all the legs as well, but the front two on, as well as your accent chairs, your coffee table, your end tables, side tables, whatever you got going on over there, creating that zone so it looks and feels like a sufficient living room, because it is. So often, sometimes these lines are blurred because people sort of don't clearly separate where the dining room meets the kitchen perhaps, or maybe where the kitchen meets the living area. And they just sort of become sort of a mishmash of all of the above. And it doesn't feel like you've created distinct rooms. This is especially important, not just for furniture, which I talked about, but even things like the material sort of fixed elements that you might have in your space. So for example, flooring. You've heard me say on this channel before that those transition points when you're exiting one room and entering another are a great opportunity to change up paint or material, flooring, whatever you sort of may choose, right? So if you're exiting the living room and you're going into the kitchen, it's at that transition point where you have your kitchen island perhaps, or maybe a peninsula, that you can change out your flooring. And you can go from engineered hardwood and then go to tile. You can't just change it when you feel like it. You know what I mean? You have to look at those transition points as the space, that kind of area where you can switch that up. Same goes for things like paint. Yes, you can do random accent walls like it's 2005 Trading Spaces, or you can use a transition point as an opportunity to sort of switch out your color. So for example, in my last apartment, I had a navy wall in my background, but the wall that I had painted navy was really the dining area and not the living area, which I had painted white. But I had clearly sort of defined, even though it was kind of a bit vague, but I had used sort of paint as a way to guide which walls belonged to the dining area and which walls belonged to the living area. I also used moldings as a similar way to sort of do that. So the dining area had moldings, but the hallway didn't. And so you're kind of able to sort of define and assign walls to different areas of the space, even though there are multiple rooms existing within the same room. So just because it's an open concept doesn't mean you have open season on putting whatever materials you want wherever you want. Still, you should clearly define those zones existing within that one larger space. It's tricky because you're creating one space, but you're also creating multiple spaces all at the same time. But I think you can do it. You just need to focus on, where are those clearly defined areas for those different distinct rooms, and make sure that the design language is similar throughout them while still taking into account that they're all sort of loosely connected as well, because it's an open concept. Next up on my list of open floor plan mistakes is not taking into account sort of the eye line between the different spaces. So one of the advantages and disadvantages of an open floor plan is that you can interact from one room to the next because it's open. So for example, one thing, I used to have sort of an open concept in my last apartment, and I don't here, right? This living room that you see here, the kitchen's behind that wall. So one of the things that I find really annoying about that, which is a great plus for an open concept, is while you're cooking, you can actually watch TV because you've got an open floor plan. So you can actually see the television while you're cooking. Here you can't do that. You have to pause the TV, go over, stir your little chili or whatever, and then go back and then unpause your television show. Do you know what I mean? Which is kind of a little bit annoying. In an open concept, you don't have to do that. So maybe you've got kids and you want to keep an eye on them. You can keep an eye on them while they're, say, coloring at the kitchen table in the dining area, or they're maybe sitting at the coffee table, or they're watching TV and you're sitting there cooking, whatever you're doing, right? Like, so you can actually interact with the different rooms all in the same space. That's also a disadvantage because sometimes you don't want to, right? Sometimes you're hosting a dinner party, and although it's really nice to have the dining and the kitchen connected, it also means that you got to keep your kitchen pretty clean while you got your, friends over, which can be a disaster sometimes when you're cooking up a storm and you kind of want to close that off, which is an advantage of the traditional concept. So really it's about making sure that those sight lines and that flow between the rooms is what you want to be. So make sure you design it with your lifestyle in mind. If you have the opportunity to do a traditional concept, maybe you're doing a new build or a reno, consider it if that's really important to you. Or there's things like dividing walls, like different dividers and stuff that you can use to try to sort of create some separation between the spaces if that's what you're trying to do. But be mindful when you're kind of designing your space of how you want the different rooms to interact with each other to make sure that it works for you. So for me, I know that when I build my new home, it's going to be important to me to make sure that the TV in the living area is still visible from the kitchen, just because that works for me and my lifestyle. It might not work for you. You might want something different, and that's cool. But that's just something to keep in mind, is make sure to consider those sight lines and how the rooms are going to interact. By the way, it's also very important, since the sight lines mean that all your kitchen appliances and kitchen tools and all the rest of it is going to be visible from your dining area and your living room, which of course leads seamlessly, I might add, into today's sponsor, which is Caraway. So Caraway offers high quality kitchenware that's also non-toxic. I got the ceramic cookware set in cream, which is absolutely stunning. I think investing in beautiful cookware is worth it because not only is it high quality and functional and makes for, you're just going to enjoy cooking a lot more, but it also looks good when you're using it as well. And it also looks good, of course, when you're leaving it out, which is really important when you have an open floor plan. Traditional nonstick pans tend to have toxins like PTFE, which have been linked to serious health issues, including cancer. But Caraway is 100% non-toxic, and it really feels great to know that my cookware isn't leaching harmful chemicals into the air or, of course, the food that I eat. Their ceramic pan surfaces are non-toxic and not stick, which means there is minimal need for butter or oil for cooking and things. It makes for super easy cleanup, which is great because I'm very lazy and I hate cleaning up the dishes. So I'd also recommend getting the cookware set like I did. It comes with the saute pan, the frying pan, the Dutch oven, as well as the saucepan as well. This saves you 20% versus buying individually. And Caraway is having its biggest sale of the year, and it's the perfect time to snag those investment pieces that you've been eyeing. So take advantage of their Black Friday / Cyber Monday deals and get up to 20% off right now using my link in my description. Thank you, Caraway, for sponsoring this video. Okay, and then next mistake that I see in open floor plans is ignoring focal points. So what is a focal point, you might add? Again, remember that Trading Spaces reference, how they just like picked an accent wall and called it a focal point? We don't do that anymore. What we're looking for is that distinct feature that you're gonna be using in each of your zones in your open concept and making that sort of the focal point for you want to draw people's eye into. And then that becomes the focal point that you center in on when you're doing your design, and then the other sort of pieces flow outward from there. So in your living room, for example, it could be a fireplace. It could be your fireplace with the TV above it. It could be a giant, like, you've got a great view. Let's say you got a giant bay window that overlooks, look how fabulous is that for you? We're all very jealous, but maybe you got a gorgeous view out this big floor to ceiling window that you have, and that's amazing. That's your focal point. Maybe you wanna make that your focal point instead. In your kitchen, it's probably gonna be maybe a kitchen island, could be a peninsula for your dining area. It's probably gonna be the big dining table, right? So for the record, like a bedroom is probably gonna be the bed, right? Like those are typically your focal points that you see most often. Now, why does that matter for open concept? Well, you wanna make sure that each zone, they're rooms, but I wanna call them zones because I think it's easier to understand an open concept because it's a bit flowy, you know what I mean? I think it's important that each room still have its focal point. Dining area, gonna be easy. You're probably gonna have a dining room table, but it might not be as clear on kitchen and living room. So trying to make sure that you still have those focal points that are gonna draw the attention to that room so that it still sort of stands on its own. Because so often I think you can be like, okay, that's the living room, and then you can sort of forget about the kitchen and the dining area, and it can come across a little bit as a bit haphazard. So still focus in on those focal points and make sure that no matter kind of where you're standing in the room, as you turn to all the different rooms, there's a clear focal point, and then the rest of the room, zone, if you will, sort of works to support that. That's what's needed when you're you're doing in these rooms. Again, it's that play of how do you make different zones feel distinct and they work for the room and the function of what you're creating there. So dining, living, kitchen, while also taking into account that the whole thing needs to flow together as well. Focal points are a big part of that. Okay, next up is going to be pushing everything up against the wall. This is especially true for the living room. This is a good just overall tip. Just don't push it. We're not doing this. We're not doing this anymore. It's not the 90s anymore. We're not doing this. We're not just pushing everything against the wall because again, we're creating the zone. And what is this going to be about? Well, the primary function of a living room is supposed to be for conversation. It's for people to engage and interact with each other. Even if you don't like each other, that's still the primary point of that's the purpose. That's the purpose of a living room, okay? Yes, we all, you know, we're watching TV. We love it. I too, I love Only Murders in the Building as well, just as much as you do. And like, I love that show. And of course, I'm gonna use my TV and that's what my living room is for. I get it. But really, you wanna make sure that it's built for conversation. And so part of that is gonna make sure that you have all your furniture set up kind of really for that zone. It's oftentimes, I think, an open concept, not always as obvious where these sort of are, these zones sort of are that you're sort of putting together. And sometimes people get really scared and they just push everything up against the wall, which is a mistake because I think you should confidently take into account how you're gonna put your living room together so that it feels conversational. Also, I would be very mindful too of like, how do you want your sofa and your accent chairs to be situated such that it doesn't necessarily completely close off the living room separate to that dining and kitchen like we talked about. It should feel open and easy to move between those three spaces because that's part of the advantage of being in an open concept, right? Is that you are able to sort of move freely between those three rooms or whatever rooms you're talking about open concept, but those are usually the three. If you're in a studio and you got a bedroom in there, of course, this applies as well. But like, usually you just wanna make sure that you're able to easily flow between the rooms. And so often I think these giant sectionals or these sofas are used sort of as kind of, you know, they become the backdrop of the living area, but sometimes what it can do is it can really close the living room off from the rest of those other two spaces. So try to create an area where you have a zone, but you have a living room that feels inviting and easy to sort of move into at the same time. But, you know, people get scared of that, of making it feel closed off, so they just shove everything against the wall, which I think is a mistake. Get everything into, you know, on that area rug so that everybody's in there getting friendly and happy together and you're creating that conversational area, but that still feels open and has flow with the rest of the other rooms, zones in the open concept. Okay, next up is not planning your electrical. This is something I think a lot of people don't really consider. Now I know if you're just like decorating and you're not renovating or something, this might not feel like it applies to you necessarily, but I think it's worth noting because when you have an open concept, you probably don't have as many walls as you do if you have a closed concept. So oftentimes those electrical outlets, light switches and things aren't as well thought through and planned out as they might be in a traditional concept. Because again, you don't have as much room, especially in these sort of larger spaces, to be able to run the electrical properly because you just don't have the walls, you know what I mean? And you don't really consider that your electrical needs are probably still the same as they would be no matter what type of concept you choose. But in an open concept, you don't have the wall real estate to put as many plugs. So consider things like putting electrical in the island, for example, electrical in the peninsula, could be electrical in the floor. Maybe you want to consider that. That's an interesting option that might make sense for you, right? Like inside different cabinetry, you know, you might want to consider putting different electrical outlets and things in there just because, you know, you might find that you're like, well, I want to put a table lamp in this little cute little living room zone, but there's like no wall for like 10 feet around it. And so where are you supposed to put the electrical to actually plug in that table or that floor lamp? And you know what kind of sucks is you build an entire house that costs you like $1 million and then you realize you can't plug in a floor lamp. Whoopsies, you forgot about electrical. So, you know, consider that when you're planning your open concept. Okay, and then next up on my list is just gonna be having too much. Like too much. Too many different styles, too many different colors, too many different pieces, too much furniture, too much pattern, too much color, too much everything. Consider that because this is multiple rooms all happening at the same time, and again, we're gonna zoom out a little bit and consider, yes, there's each individual room that's happening, but it's all coexisting in one larger space. So oftentimes people have too much stuff and it adds to the visual weight of the space. So, you know, if you have a living room that's got too much furniture in it already, which you know is a pet peeve of mine when people just have like 14 end tables and bar stools and whatever, and it's all a little much. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot. We don't need 6 accent chairs, you know what I mean, in a small apartment. So finding just too much furniture in general, people maybe are reluctant to edit. We're gonna say that kindly. Yeah, they're reluctant to edit and they should maybe edit. And in an open concept, that can feel really heavy because you've got tons of appliances, countertop appliances, and you know I love a countertop kitchen appliance. You know that. You guys know I have 2 waffle makers. You know I have an egg bite maker that I never use. Like I love that, but not storing it. And then having an overwhelming amount of living room furniture, and then having 8 dining chairs in your giant oak dining room table, and it's a lot, and bookcases all over the place. It feels heavy, and it feels like a lot going on. And so you might need to be even more mindful of how you're going to edit down the space, because they're all existing at the same time, and there's no sort of breathing space that is offered by exiting and entering different rooms. So that might be something you want to consider. Also, again, you know, you might have like a farmhouse style in the kitchen, but then you might have gone mid-century modern in the living room, which again, I'm not going to say that makes sense in a closed concept as well, but it's especially glaring when you're in an open concept that it's all happening at the exact same time. And it's like, okay, I get you decided to go for like the chicken farm decor in the kitchen, but it just doesn't work because there's not a chicken in sight in the living room. So you went for a completely different, you know, viewpoint there, a completely different style, and you have to take into account that it's all existing at the same time. People can see what's happening in the kitchen when they're in the living, so be mindful of that, because there's just sometimes too much going on. You sort of have to be a little bit more aware, I think, when you have an open concept, the fact that this all needs to work together, and so cohesion between the spaces matters a lot more. I'm not saying go super matchy, and I'm not saying you always need to play it safe too, because I sometimes think these open concept rooms, they tend to be really sort of farmhouse or minimalist Scandi spaces where everything is white and gray. I say this is a place that is more brown as I even look in the viewfinder as I'm looking right now. It's like, oh God. But anyway, I get you. Like, you don't have to just stick to like 1 or 2 colors, because I think people do that because they're scared to add a lot of color and texture and pattern because they're worried it's all gonna match together. I'm not saying you have to be scared and just go with white, everything, in order to make it work, but you do just need to be mindful of using that sort of 80-20 rule we've talked about, where you sort of have a dominant style and you have like a color palette that takes into account, you know, lots of different tints, tones, and shades happening within a palette, and sticking to that across the different rooms. That becomes really important when you're in an open concept. Okay, and then my next tip is going to be not considering noise reduction. Noise is something people forget about, and they shouldn't, because oftentimes these are really good for families, and children are loud. They're really loud. They're so loud. And when you've got kids running around and you're in the kitchen and like they're in the living room or whatever, like this is where sometimes the closed concept makes sense. This is why I think a lot of people love the closed concept, is because we had a little, you know, remember that pandemic where we were all shut in? Remember that? And everybody was really annoying. Turns out our family and friends are a lot more annoying than we realized. And now we live with them, and they don't leave. They never leave. And so now they're noisy all the time. And so it's one thing, you know, if you're cooking dinner and you're in a closed concept and they're all sitting there killing themselves in the living room, chasing each other, playing, I don't know, whatever, tag or something, well, you could now like just shove them in there and forget about it. But in open concept, you can't do that. This is one of the disadvantages of the open concept: noise. So how do you reduce noise? Short of forcing your children to stay in their rooms, which I'm not necessarily saying you shouldn't do, but like assuming they're gonna stick around and like be in the living room, what can you do? I don't know, like dividers, like you got room dividers, making sure you do the old rules that you typically do for noise reduction. So this is going to be noise dampening things through things like fabrics and different textures in furniture and things, because you know that really like hollow, noisy is oftentimes because you don't have enough furniture or you don't have enough things going on. If it's too simple, it's too basic, and there's just not enough furniture happening, sometimes it can make a space feel more hollow, which I know sort of feels like it contradicts the don't have too much furniture. Like I said earlier, we're looking for Goldilocks here, just enough furniture, not too much, not too little. So again, that could be things like room dividers, it could be rugs, it could be, you know, furniture placement, trying to sort of make people sort of sectioned off so that it's not super noisy and you're able to kind of situate your furniture in such a way that they're kind of alone in their own thing. And also maybe recognizing that like open concept is great, but it does have its disadvantages, and there is a need if you have like a larger home. So if you're in an apartment and it's all open concept, well, there you go. But it's like, you kind of have to work with what you got here, you know what I mean? But if you do have a larger home, recognizing that maybe having all of your rooms sort of combined in one space is going to perhaps lead to some chaos. And so having some extra rooms and planning some extra rooms, I joke about sending your kids to their bedrooms when they're misbehaving or when they're being too noisy. That's up to you and how you want to discipline. But having some rooms that are maybe separate, right? Some people have media rooms for this reason, because they just want to separate that out. Some people have rec rooms and kids play areas and rooms that are completely separate, offices, right? For people to have, you know, that private workspace for them to work on. So finding that, you know, recognizing that open concept doesn't solve all your problems, and sometimes your needs are varied, agreed. And you might need other rooms that are used for different purposes in order to reduce sound, because sound is a problem in open concept, because there's a lot of people that are all existing in a small area, and walls are really good. You know what are really good at reducing sound? Walls and doors, and you don't have those. And so maybe just ship people off to the other side of the house and plan for that. That's maybe my best tip. Or, you know, send your kids to somebody else's house and then they're not your problem anymore. Okay, that's it for me for today, guys. I'm gonna send you over here to my living room design mistakes video, because I think you'd love that. I do a lot of mistakes videos on this channel because it's super fun for me and I get to make fun of the stupid things people do in their homes. And so if you think that that sounds enjoyable, go and check that video out. It's all about the living room and it's a good time. So I'll see you all over there. Bye.